Hello and a very good afternoon to all News9 viewers. I'm Neha Bhan. We continue to bring you the latest updates on the Israel-Hamas war. Today marks day 15th since Hamas carried out attacks on southern Israel, killing 1,400 people and kidnapping 200 Israeli citizens as hostages. Here's the latest update from day 15. Now, in the latest update, more than a dozen trucks carrying relief materials have finally been allowed to enter the Rafah Crossing. This means that Gazans who have been under intense shelling and bombardment from the Israel side will have some respite. They're right on your screens. Rafah border crossing has opened for aid. Now, Hamas has also released 2 American captives who were held in Gaza yesterday. The terrorist organization has said that it is open to releasing more captives. Meanwhile, bombings persist in besieged Gaza Strip, where several Hamas terrorists have sought shelter. And regarding the death toll, as of now, 4,200 people have been killed in Gaza, while 13,000 have been left injured. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden has requested over $105 billion from Congress. This is to provide security assistance for the ongoing wars in Ukraine and Israel. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that it is the darkest hour of the world. And do remember that Iraq, which is in fact closer to Israel, this is the warning that you saw just right on your screens that is being sent out to the US military. They've asked them to leave. Moving on now, it all started on the 7th of October when Palestinian terrorist organization Hamas launched attacks on southern Israel. Israel retaliated. And now, it's a known fact that people become casualties during such times. And that's what is happening with the people of Gaza. However, in some respite, the Rafah crossing point between Egypt and Gaza has finally opened. Nearly a dozen Egyptian trucks carrying relief materials such as medical supplies was finally allowed to enter the crossing after intense negotiations involving the United States, Israel, Egypt and the UN. Now, under the agreement, only 20 trucks will be allowed and the deliveries will be from the Egyptian Red Crescent to the Palestinian Red Crescent organization. Reports suggest that next convoy may not be allowed to cross until Monday. The Israeli government, which feared that Hamas would use the aid that is being sent out for the people of Gaza, the Israel government in fact has now demanded to see a proof that the aid material is not being taken away by Hamas. It is important to note that the Rafah crossing has only opened for aid and not for evacuations. Right on your screens, these are some of the graphics that we have put out for you for those who are interested in knowing all about Gaza. And that's in fact the latest update that we are getting for all our viewers. The Rafah border crossing has opened and the UN has stated that next convoy might not pass until Monday. So here now the Israeli government, which also was fearing that Hamas would use the aid that is being sent out for the people of Gaza, it has demanded to see a proof that the material is not being taken away by the Hamas terrorist organization. Why was the crossing shut? The crossing was closed for security restrictions imposed by Israel and Egypt after Hamas launched an attack on the southern Israel on the 7th of October. Restrictions began in 2007 when Hamas assumed control of Gaza. That's when the restrictions began, and there Israel and Egypt have argued that blockade is necessary for security reasons. This is the reason why the crossing is shut. Now, Israel's siege on Gaza has affected essential supplies and services. Do remember that the hospitals in Gaza are running dangerously low on supplies. Right on your screens now, over a dozen trucks have moved into Gaza. Finally, the people of Gaza, Gazans are going to have some sort of respite given that the Rafah crossing point between Egypt and Gaza has finally opened. Talking about the death toll, well, here about 4,200 people have lost their lives in Gaza, while 13,000 have been left injured. And in Israel, we have around 1,400 casualties. There on your screens, nearly a dozen Egyptian trucks carrying relief materials such as medical supplies was finally allowed to enter the crossing. It was after intense negotiations involving the US, Israel, Egypt and the UN. Now here it is important to note that the Rafah Crossing has only opened for aid and not for evacuation.
Just trucks. They are a lifeline. They are the difference between life and death for so many people in Gaza. And to see them stuck here makes me be very clear. What we need is to make them move. To make them move to the other side of this wall. To make them move as quickly as possible and as many as possible.
Moving on now, St. Pirus Church that was sheltering hundreds of people from the war was hit by Israeli airstrikes. The Greek Orthodox Church, the oldest in the city located in the Zaitun neighborhood, has traditionally served as a sanctuary for both Christians and Muslims during Israel's periodic wars. Right on your screens, visuals coming in from St. Pirus Church that was sheltering hundreds of people from the war. From the war, there it was hit by Israeli airstrikes, and the Greek Orthodox Church, which is the oldest in the city and is located in the Zaitun neighborhood, has traditionally served as a sanctuary for both Christians and Muslims, and it was now badly hit. Right on your screens, reduced to rubble. There have been about 18 people who have lost their lives in the airstrike. This was the particular church that was sheltering hundreds of people from the war. Unfortunately, it also was hit by an Israeli airstrike, and there and now there 18 people lost their lives in the airstrikes, and it is in fact the oldest church in the city that was located in the Zaitun neighborhood and traditionally served as a sanctuary for both Christians and Muslims during Israel's periodic wars. The Palestinian Red Crescent announced that they received a warning from Israeli forces to immediately evacuate Gaza's Al-Quds hospital, which currently houses over 400 patients and 12,000 displaced civilians. The Palestinian Red Crescent issued an urgent appeal to the international community, saying that they call on the world to take immediate and urgent action to prevent a new massacre like the one that occurred on Al-Ahli Baptist Hospital, in which about 500 people lost their lives, and the blame game had just begun between the Hamas terrorist organization as well as the Israeli Defense Forces. Both of them put the onus on one another when it came to the bombing of the Al-Ahli Baptist Hospital. But now the Palestinian Red Crescent has also announced that they have received a warning from Israeli forces to immediately evacuate Gaza's Al-Quds hospital. The hospital currently houses over 400 patients and 12,000 displaced civilians. Protesters from Jakarta to Tunis demanded an end to Israel's bombardment of Gaza after nearly 2 weeks of intense air and artillery strikes that authorities there say have killed more than 4,000 people.
From thousands hitting the streets in Yemen to a sea of flags in Iran and a burning effigy of Israel's prime minister and symbolic funeral prayers for Palestinians in Turkey. Muslims around the world protested on Friday, demanding an end to Israel's bombardment of Gaza. I have an overwhelming feeling, says this woman in Cairo. Gaza's pain is our pain. Nearly 6,000 protesters turned out in Jordan, where much of the population has Palestinian heritage. They called for the bombing to end and voiced support for Hamas, urging it to attack Israel with rocket strikes and suicide bombers. For nearly 2 weeks, Israel has been pummeling the enclave with intense strikes that authorities there say have killed more than 4,000 people. It's also ramping up for a ground war aimed at eradicating Hamas. The group rampaged into Israeli towns on October 7th, killing 1,400 people and taking hostages. While some Western governments have thrown their support behind Israel's military campaign, many Muslim states have called for an immediate ceasefire. In Cairo, thousands gathered at one of the oldest mosques in the world. This protest at Al-Azhar is just a microcosm of Egypt. It is just a show of unity with them, this man says of Palestinians. A driving force for many protesters, they say, was Tuesday's blast at a Gaza hospital, which authorities there said killed hundreds of people. Hamas says Israel was responsible for the blast. Israel blames a failed rocket launch by a Palestinian group.
Now, the Islamist group Hamas has released 2 U.S. hostages, mother and daughter, Judith and Natalie Renan, who were kidnapped in its attack on Israel. A Hamas spokesperson said the decision was for humanitarian reasons and to prove claims made by Biden and his fascist administration are false.
The Islamist group Hamas has freed 2 American hostages, a mother and a daughter, the first known hostage release in the war between it and Israel. Israel's military spokesperson said Judith and Natalie Renan were kidnapped during Hamas's surprise attack on Israel on October 7th, and that they were received on the border by Israeli forces. The International Committee of the Red Cross says it transported them through Gaza. The Hamas attacks in Israel killed 1,400 people. Around 200 were taken as hostages. Hamas says the mother and daughter were released for humanitarian reasons and, quote, to prove to the American people and the world that claims made by Biden and his fascist administration are false. They also say that the hostage release came from negotiations by the government of Qatar. This was U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken.
We expect a team from the U.S. Embassy to see them very shortly. Over the coming hours, they'll receive any support and assistance that they need. The urgent work to free every single American, to free all other hostages, continues, as does our work to secure the safe passage out of Gaza for the Americans who are trapped there. In this particular instance, I want to thank the government of Qatar for their very important assistance.
Meanwhile, Israeli airstrikes continue to pound Gaza now 2 weeks after the Hamas attacks and have killed over 4,000 people. Hamas has said about 20 of its hostages were previously killed in airstrikes without giving details. It also says a further 50 hostages are being held by other militant groups.
The Israeli army displayed a large cache of weapons and supplies obtained from Hamas militants amid the attack on the 7th of October. The weapons seized include Hamas's grenades, landmines, and rocket-propelled grenades. Take a look. Right on your screens, the Israeli army, they're displaying large cache of weapons that it was able to seize from the Hamas terrorists amid the attack that was carried out by the Hamas terrorist organization on southern Israel, against southern Israel, in fact, on the 7th of October.
They have the breaching devices which were supposed to break defense. They have the rockets that were supposed to shoot on our tanks. They have those magnetic IED in order to bomb our tanks and private vehicles.
The White House has proposed to bolster Israel and Ukraine. The total cost of the supplemental funding request was pegged at just over $1.5 billion. President Joe Biden hopes Congress will move urgently on the legislation, and he made the case for deepening U.S. support for its allies during a rare Oval Office address.
In what was only his second ever speech from the Oval Office, U.S. President Joe Biden on Thursday made his case to Americans that tens of billions in wartime aid should be sent to Israel and Ukraine, while also linking Hamas to Russian President Vladimir Putin.
American leadership is what holds the world together. American alliances are what keep us, America, safe. Hamas and Putin represent different threats, but they share this in common. They both want to completely annihilate a neighboring democracy, completely annihilate it.
A source familiar with Biden's plan told Reuters he will ask for $100 billion in new spending, including $60 billion for Ukraine and $14 billion for Israel. The remainder will be split between Asia, U.S. border security, and humanitarian aid. He spoke from the Oval Office less than 24 hours after returning from a whirlwind trip to Israel, meant to show U.S. solidarity after the attack by Hamas militants around 2 weeks ago that killed 1,400 Israelis. Biden acknowledged that Americans were asking why U.S. support matters in these wars. He framed his pitch as a necessary cost.
To support our critical partners, including Israel and Ukraine, is a smart investment that's going to pay dividends for American security for generations. Help us keep American troops out of harm's way. Help us build a world that is safer, more peaceful, more prosperous for our children and grandchildren.
Hours after the speech, Russia's foreign ministry fired back, saying on Telegram that Biden's comment calling the aid request an investment showed Washington benefits from proxy wars rather than fighting for ideas. Biden's comments come with some urgency. Israel is gearing up for a ground offensive in the Gaza Strip, and tensions are at a fever pitch after a deadly blast at a Gaza hospital. Biden said in his speech that Israel was not responsible, as Hamas officials have maintained. But as global protests grow over the hospital strike, he urged Israel not to, quote, give into blind rage, and recognize the need to supply humanitarian aid to Palestinians caught in the crossfire in Gaza.
Yesterday, in discussions with the leaders of Israel and Egypt, I secured an agreement for the first shipment of humanitarian assistance from the United Nations to Palestinian civilians in Gaza. As I said in Israel, as hard as it is, we cannot give up on peace. We cannot give up on a two-state solution.
Biden's spending request comes at a time of political chaos in Washington. The Republicans who control the House of Representatives have failed to unite behind a new speaker after ousting Kevin McCarthy from the job early this month. The funding measure, which must pass both the Democratic-led U.S. Senate and Republican-controlled but currently leaderless House, will test whether Republican lawmakers can be persuaded to set aside their opposition and approve the new spending.
My colleague Manish Jha, who's currently in Israel, also in fact is currently in Hebron, where he is at the Cave of the Patriarchs. A scholar explains the importance of the Cave of the Patriarchs and why there are claims and counterclaims on the religious site. Take a listen.
यहाँ पर तो मुझे बताया गया कि संभल के रहिएगा, गोली कभी भी चला सकते हैं, उधर से भी गोली आ सकती है और सिक्योरिटी वाले ने कहा कि हो सकती है कि हमारी भी गोली आपको लग जाए, इसलिए संभल कर रहिएगा। तो कुल मिलाकर यह है कि इस टेरिटरी पे आने के बाद सबसे पहले मुझे यही बताया गया कि आप जहां पर भी हैं उस जगह पर कभी भी गोली चल सकती है। ये हालात है। देखिए, बीते 24 घंटे का संघर्ष हमने देखा है। बीते 24 घंटे में हमने देखा है कि कैसे सिक्योरिटी फोर्सेस और यहाँ के लोग एक दूसरे के साथ टकरा रहे थे। लगातार अचानक कुछ ही मिनट के अंदर हजारों की संख्या में लोग बाहर आ जाते हैं। मैं इस वक्त आपको उस पूरे इलाके में भी दिखाता हूं, बल्कि अगर मैं कहूं तो यह भी गलत नहीं होगा कि पूरे इस आबादी के बीच में जो सबसे सेफ प्लेस है, वो सेफ प्लेस में मुझे सिक्योरिटी पर्सन्स ने लाकर भेजा कि आप यहां खड़े होकर बात करिए ताकि कहीं से भी अगर गोली वगैरह आए तो आप यहां पर सुरक्षित रह सके। देखिए, पूरा जो इलाका है ये वेस्ट बैंक का वो इलाका है, फिलिस्तीनियों का वो इलाका है जहां पर कि हमें तुरंत ही गाजा पट्टी पर हुए हमले का असर तुरंत दिखता है। अस्पताल पर हुए हमले के बाद से तो यहां का माहौल बेहद तनावपूर्ण है। मुझे हमेशा ऐसा लग रहा है जैसे ये पूरा जेल का एक इलाका है, और जबकि यहूदियों के लिए ये सबसे पवित्र स्थलों में से एक है। लेकिन वेस्ट बैंक के इस इलाके में आकर साफ तौर पर एहसास होता है कि तनाव कितना चरम पर है। Right now I am in Hebron and I am joining with Mikhail and he will explain us where we are and how the situation right now here. So Mikhail, thank you so much for talking to us and please explain me where we are first.
We are in Hebron. Hebron is one of the second holiest cities in Israel. Hebron goes back, mentioned in the Bible, if I'm not mistaken, over 40 times. It is the burial place or the resting place of the forefathers of the founders of the Jewish nation, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who we mention 3 times a day in our prayers. They are buried here, but we don't see this place just as a burial place, because if you come here on a Jewish holiday, where everybody in the world goes on a holiday to a resort or a hotel or something, you'll find many people coming here happily, dancing with music. It's a place of life, because we draw from them the ability to continue in what we're supposed to do in this world, which is to bring light to the world.
So when I was coming to this area, I saw like lots of territory or lots of houses by the Arabs. So does it mean that the whole area is surrounded by the Arab, and in between this is the place, a very religious and holy place for Hebrew?
Well, not necessarily, because there are other places, neighborhoods, Jewish places, communities which live on the road. If you came here 200 years ago, if you read the writings of Mark Twain or Tristram, who was a Christian priest who traveled the land in the middle of the 18th, end of the 18th century, you would find a desolate, barren land with almost no people living here. The land was, I would say, gives out its gift to the world and to the Jewish people. Since the Jewish people came back to the land is smiling at us. And you know, when a place becomes attractive and good, then it draws people from all around. So you would find probably a very small Arab population all the way from Jerusalem to Hebron, if we go back not a long time ago.
Since you mentioned about the land, so when I was going through, I was reading that this territory is owned by so many rulers, and right now it is, since it is in West Bank, so it is under the control of Palestine Authority, or what?
Well, I tend to object to the word Palestine, not because Palestine is not a word which we would use. The Jews never left the land of Israel. The land of Israel is a godly given land to the Jewish people. We don't have a right to the land, we have an obligation to the land. To us, the Bible, we are strongly connected to, otherwise we would have gone to Uganda or somewhere else, is not a history book. It's a book which tells us how the world is supposed to function correctly, for the world to become a place of light and not darkness. And therefore we have an obligation. A person cannot turn to his God and say to him, very nice, you know, there are so many commandments, I'll keep them all, but coming back to the land is something I will give up on. Every one of us who came from outside of Israel could probably have lived a very comfortable life somewhere else in the world where they were born or where they would possibly emigrate to. So we come back to the land in order to bring redemption to the world. And therefore, Jewish people are connected to their forefathers, we're connected to the land itself, and anybody who wants to join us and create, I would say, positivity in this part of the world is welcome to. Anybody who wants to destroy us or hurt us, then unfortunately evil has to be defeated to the end.
Outspoken conservative Jim Jordan sought more time to bolster his faltering bid for the top job in the United States House of Representatives after losing a second vote on Wednesday, while his fellow Republicans considered a backup option for the leaderless chamber. Take a look.
I told the conference it was an honor to be there, Speaker designee.
But hardline conservative Jim Jordan is no longer that. His pursuit of becoming the Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives ended on Friday after a third failed vote on the House floor.
A Speaker has not been elected.
Republicans then voted 112-86 to revoke Jordan's nomination in a closed-door meeting.
I told the conference that I appreciated getting to work with everyone, talk with everyone. I got to know members in our conference that I didn't really know that well over the last 3 weeks, and that we need to come together and figure out who our speaker is going to be. I'm going to work as hard as I can to help that individual so that we can go help the American people.
Support for Jordan's bid faded this week as the Ohio Republican got less votes on Friday than he did on Tuesday.
200 votes.
Well short of the majority he needed to claim the Speaker's gavel. but it remains unclear who Republicans might throw their support behind next. Lawmaker Kevin McCarthy, who was ousted as Speaker by a small faction of his fellow Republicans nearly 3 weeks ago, said the party is in need of repair.
Jim is no longer going to be the nominee. We'll have to go back to the drawing board. What history will look at, the crazy eights led by Gates, the amount of damage they have done to this party and to this country is insurmountable.
The chamber remains leaderless and, as of now, is unable to respond to President Joe Biden's request for aid to Ukraine and Israel. But could next week be a game changer?
Hi, everybody.
Here's Acting House Speaker Patrick McHenry, who at one point this week was considered to be given more authority until Republicans ultimately rejected that temporary backup plan.
House Republicans will return on Monday at 6:30 p.m. for a candidate forum, followed by an election process on Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. The reason why I made that decision is we need space and time for candidates to talk to other members.
Republicans Austin Scott and Kevin Hern said they would try for the Speaker's job, and Jody Arrington said he would make a decision by Sunday.
Moving on, China's new restrictions on graphite exports are sending ripples through the electric vehicle market. Beijing's decision aimed at safeguarding national security could significantly impact EV manufacturers. China, a major player in refining graphite for EV batteries, now demands export permits, raising concerns of supply shortages. Analysts suggest South Korean firms in particular face challenges due to heavy reliance on Chinese imports. Automakers are scrambling to secure supplies from other sources, but the looming changes could pose a cost burden and potential shortages in the industry. Let's dive into the full story. Listen in.
New restrictions announced in China could be unwelcome news for the growing electric vehicle market. Beijing said on Friday it will require export permits for some graphite products to protect national security. It's the latest move by the country to control supplies of critical minerals in response to challenges over its global manufacturing dominance. The reason this might hurt EV makers is because China refines more than 90% of the world's graphite into the material used in virtually all EV battery anodes. That's the negatively charged portion of a battery. One analyst said South Korean firms heavily rely on the graphite imports from China, but would have to look elsewhere to the US or Australia, and that would likely raise the cost burden for many. Automakers are now racing to lock in supplies from outside China, but there could be shortages. China will now require, as of December, that exporters apply for permits to ship 2 types of graphite. Beijing said the move was conducive to ensuring the security and stability of the global supply chain and safeguarding national security. China's decision comes while the EU considers tariffs on Chinese-made EVs, which it argues unfairly benefit from subsidies. The US government also widened curbs on Chinese companies' access to semiconductors earlier this week. Analysts said it was not clear how much impact the new measures on graphite will have in the short term. But on Friday, shares in China's new energy vehicle and battery makers rose after the announcement.
Now, Russia has detained a journalist of a US-funded Radio Free Europe for failing to register as a foreign agent while visiting on a family emergency.
Alsu Kamasheva, an editor at US-funded Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, has been detained by Russia. That's according to the broadcaster. RFE said the detention was for failing to register as a foreign agent while visiting Russia for a family emergency. Kamasheva, an editor with Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty's Tatar Bashkir service, holds both US and Russian passports. Russia's tightened its control over the media since the start of the Ukraine war. Leading independent news outlets have closed, and many journalists and publications designated as so-called foreign agents. The term, which carries Cold War connotations of espionage, is used in Russia to label organizations, journalists, activists and celebrities deemed to be engaging in political activity with foreign support. After the war and the arrest of Wall Street Journal correspondent Evan Gershkovich in March on spying charges, almost all US journalists have left the country. The State Department's repeatedly urged US citizens to leave Russia. Kamasheva travelled to Russia on May 20th. As she sought to leave Russia at the end of her trip at Kazan airport, she was detained and her passports were confiscated as she awaited her return flight. She was fined for failing to register her US passport with Russian authorities. In a statement, RFE's acting president Jeffrey Gedmin said, "Alsu is a highly respected colleague, devoted wife and dedicated mother to 2 children. She needs to be released so she can return to her family immediately." Russia's Tatar Inform news agency said Kamasheva had failed to register as a foreign agent while gathering information on Russia's military activity. She could face up to 5 years in prison, according to RFE. The Russian government has yet to comment.
Now on Wednesday, the US significantly reduced sanctions on Venezuela's oil industry due to a deal made between the government and opposition parties regarding the 2024 election. Take a look at this report.
You said imagine what those...
The Biden administration on Wednesday eased tough sanctions on Venezuela's oil sector. The move comes after a deal reached between the Venezuelan government to begin lifting bans that kept opposition party candidates from running in elections next year. Wednesday marks the most extensive rollback of Trump-era restrictions on Venezuela, which were imposed after President Nicolas Maduro's 2018 re-election, which the U.S. and other Western governments rejected as a sham. As part of the rollback, the U.S. Treasury Department authorized Venezuela, an OPEC member, to produce and export oil to its chosen markets for the next 6 months without limitation. The U.S. has been seeking ways to boost global flows of oil to alleviate high prices caused by sanctions on Russia and OPEC Plus decisions to reduce output. The sanctions relief comes a day after Maduro's government and the opposition on Tuesday reached an agreement for an internationally monitored vote to be held in the second half of next year. Venezuela ruling party official Jorge Rodriguez, who led the government's negotiating team at talks with the opposition, said that the sanctions relief affected all oil activities and that, quote, "the possibility of any person or company coming to Venezuela to invest is totally open." U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken welcomed Maduro's concessions, but said Washington has given him until the end of November to begin lifting bans on opposition presidential candidates and to start releasing political prisoners and, quote, wrongfully detained Americans. A senior State Department official who spoke to Reuters on condition of anonymity threatened reversal of the sanction relief unless Maduro acts accordingly.
Now, Oscar winner George Clooney and other top Hollywood stars have offered $150 million to the SAG-AFTRA Actors Union as part of a proposal to end the actors' strike as it nears its 100th day. The offer would provide the union an extra $150 million over 3 years and could help fund improved health benefits.
Actor George Clooney and other top Hollywood stars have offered $150 million to the SAG-AFTRA Actors Union as part of a proposal to end a strike that has lasted almost 100 days. Clooney's spokesperson confirmed the offer on Thursday, saying the money given the union over the next 3 years could help fund improved health benefits. Having better health benefits has been one of the union's demands during negotiations with major studios like Netflix and Warner Brothers. The entertainment news site Deadline first reported the story, citing Clooney as saying that, quote, "a lot of top earners want to be part of the solution." He also said top stars would only collect residuals once lower-paid actors received theirs. A SAG-AFTRA spokesperson didn't immediately respond to a request for comment. Clooney's remarks come after talks between the union and the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers broke down last week. Members of SAG-AFTRA have been on strike since July, disrupting TV and film production, which has left thousands of crew members and actors without work. Early this month, the Writers Guild, which had been striking in parallel, ratified a new 3-year contract with salary increases as well as better health benefits and pension funds. They were on strike for 148 days.
Now, famous break dancer George Kiminju, who's also known as Majushi Africa, dreams of making it to the Olympics one day. He says the lack of support from the Kenyan government, which does not recognize it as a sport, is holding him and the community back.
In Nairobi, Kenya, breakdancing is taking off. Breakdancer Majushi Africa was introduced to the art a decade ago and credits the dance for giving him direction.
For me, it was very appealing to the eye to see like some of the crazy moves these people are doing. And I remember at the time being like very interested, like I want to do this.
Majushi Africa is now a pillar in Nairobi's breakdancing community. He says 10 years ago, little was known about breaking, which has since become recognized as an Olympic sport and will feature in the Paris 2024 Games. He now hosts workshops and events in hopes that more exposure will allow Kenya's breakdancers to make it to the Olympics one day. However, he says the challenges to pursuing this goal are many, and he attributes it to the lack of support from the Kenyan government.
You know, at the moment, breaking or breakdancing is in the Olympics. And, you know, that would have been a very nice spot, you know, for government to come in and start supporting the local breakdancing scene. But unfortunately, we do not have a dance sport federation, which is what is required in Kenya for you to get support from the National Olympic Committee. This was not a unique situation. There is actually, for all of Africa, only 8 countries have a federation out of 54.
Majushi Africa has performed internationally, most recently in Taiwan, but he has to rely on sponsorships and donations to attend the competitions.
The art of breaking is yet to monetize, and so there is a lot of breakdancers who are really good at what they do, but they are yet to make an income or to get a revenue stream from breaking.
Still, the Kenyan breakdancing community is optimistic. Here's professional dancer Francis Mututri.
Now, since breaking has been recognized in the Olympics, now a lot of people have hope. For now, I can say breaking it's going somewhere. We're heading somewhere.
Now let's delve into the latest business and finance developments. Market reactions to the Israel-Hamas conflict have been relatively subdued, with the index suggesting investor confidence. Keep an eye on oil prices as a significant indicator, though.
From escalating tension in the Middle East to China's property pain, these are the stories to watch in business and finance. Market reaction to the conflict between Israel and militant group Hamas has been relatively modest so far. Wall Street's so-called fear gauge, the VIX index, shows investors are not as nervous as they were when Russia invaded Ukraine last year. Oil is the barometer to watch. Flash manufacturing and service sector activity surveys in the coming days could add to uncertainty. The European Central Bank meets on Thursday. It will likely have one eye on the Middle East and the other on a weakening economy. The ECB says it's still quite some distance from easing monetary policy, but traders can expect a pause for now. Microsoft and Alphabet results are due on Tuesday, Meta Platforms on Wednesday, and Amazon on Thursday. Those stocks, along with Apple, Nvidia, and Tesla combined, have accounted for the bulk of the S&P 500's 11% year-to-date gain, so any results disappointment could have broad fallout. Third quarter GDP and the monthly personal consumption expenditures price index are also due. Property turmoil threatens China's 5% growth target, even after a consensus-smashing 4.9% quarterly expansion. That hasn't escaped investors who pushed mainland shares to a nearly one-year trough. A lot of what's happening is hidden from view, and pressure on Beijing for further stimulus is strong. Steps so far have disappointed.
In a significant market development, Tesla and other electric vehicle manufacturing companies suffered a sharp decline in their stock prices on Tuesday. Now here, Tesla, which is the world's highest valued automobile manufacturer, saw a staggering drop of 9%. This equates to a potential loss of around $70 billion in its market value. Now this downturn comes days after Tesla CEO Elon Musk expressed concern over the impact of high interest rates on consumer demand.
Shares of Tesla and other electric vehicle makers plummeted on Thursday, a day after Tesla CEO Elon Musk warned that high interest rates could sap consumer demand. The world's most valuable automaker sank more than 9% and was set to lose about $70 billion in market value. On a post-earnings call Wednesday, Musk said he wanted more clarity on the economy before ramping up a planned Tesla factory in Mexico. His concerns? High borrowing costs that could deter consumers and, quote, paycheck-to-paycheck pressures on American workers. The comments marked a change in tone from Musk, who last year said his company was, quote, recession resilient. The EV maker missed quarterly revenue estimates by the most in more than 3 years, despite hefty price cuts. Tesla is not the only EV maker worried about demand. General Motors this week said it would delay production by a year of its Chevrolet Silverado and GMC Sierra electric pickup trucks at a plant in Michigan. Ford last week said it would temporarily cut one of 3 shifts at a plant that builds its F-150 Lightning pickup trucks. The automaker in July already slowed its EV ramp-up, shifting investment to commercial vehicles and hybrids. And EV startup Lucid reported a near 30% plunge in third-quarter production this week, while Amazon-backed Rivian, which makes electric pickup trucks and SUVs, also disappointed investors this month when it shied away from raising its full-year production forecast. Shares of Lucid and Rivian were down roughly 3% and 4% respectively in Thursday afternoon trading.
Fully automatic robo-taxis are driving around in San Francisco. Now, there's no human being behind the wheel. The vehicles are steered by artificial intelligence. How are people reacting to these innovative vehicles? Take a look to find out.
Driverless cars like this one are a common sight here in famously tech-friendly San Francisco. Cameras, radar and LiDAR technology continuously scan the car's surroundings. The cabs use cloud-based map systems to navigate their way through the city. But the technology isn't perfect. Cars don't always wait where they should, and often stop when they get confused, blocking traffic.
I don't know why we're stopped.
Accidents have happened. One car crashed into a fire truck in San Francisco, sparking protest, especially amongst taxi drivers.
They are a menace. They stop unexpectedly. They actually have broken the law many times. We see them signal one way and then go another way.
Sharon Giovinazzo is more convinced. Her non-profit is partnered with an autonomous car provider. And for a blind person, no driver means no discrimination.
One of the things I found out with taxis and rideshare services, because I choose to have a guide dog to navigate the world, is they will leave me standing on the side of the street and they will cancel rides even after they pull up and they see the dog. They don't want to have the dog in their vehicle. Whereas here, there's no opinion because there's no driver.
And autonomous vehicles can navigate traffic more smoothly than a human being, she says.
When you're like, or you know, that sudden stop that's made, or you know, you feel people swerving and people honking at you and not being able to see what's going on. It's fearful. It really is. I've never had one fear sitting in one of these. I just say that it's welcome to the future.
So far, robo-taxis are something of an experiment. And not all people in San Francisco want their city to be a test track. But it seems they are here to stay.
Massive wildfires have swept through thousands of hectares in Bolivian Amazon. Forest fires have destroyed crops in the Santa Cruz region and ravaged thousands of hectares of the Noel Kempif Marcedo National Park, a gateway to the pristine Amazonian rainforest. The Santa Cruz government said on Tuesday there are 12 active forest fires, mainly in the municipalities of San Matias and other areas. Helicopters have been deployed to help firefighters and authorities on the ground. Let's listen into what the Director of Natural Resources of Santa Cruz had to say about the current situation.
El departamento registra 3 municipios con emergencias por incendios forestales. Estos municipios son San Ignacio, San Matías y Concepción. Hasta el momento se han atendido 381 emergencias por incendios forestales.
Now, battling the harsh summer, more than 100 Bolivians undertook a march to a dusty plain near, a dam in La Paz city. They gathered under the scorching sun to pray for rain in order to end the severe drought that poses a massive threat to water supply. The 10 reservoirs supplying La Paz, one of the country's largest cities with about 2.2 million residents, have only about 135 days worth of water left, as warned by Bolivia's state-owned water company EPSAS. If La Paz city does not receive significant rainfall, the high-altitude city's water supplies will be exhausted by February. Now, despite the rainy season being due to start in December, the latest forecasts do not look promising. Let's hear some of the reactions coming in from La Cumbre, where over 100 Bolivians braved the scorching summer, marching for hope. They have gathered near the dam, praying for rain to end a severe drought.
En este momento hemos salido aquí donde nos ven para clamar por la lluvia. Si en verdad en estos momentos el calentamiento global está afectando a Bolivia, y no solo a Bolivia, sino a todo el mundo entero. Y nosotros necesitamos lluvia para los sembradíos, lluvia para los alimentos, lluvia para nosotros mismos.
El cambio climático que se está provocando, estas son las causas, ¿no?, que está pasando la humanidad. Y nosotros por eso hemos venido aquí a este lugar para poder unirnos en oración y en un solo clamor orar a Dios para que pueda hacer caer la lluvia sobre la tierra.
That's all we have in this edition of the Bulletin. Have a great day ahead. Thank you very much for joining in.
They picked my husband. He was tortured there for 2 years. He was enforced disappeared. We had no idea where he is. Within 15 minutes, we got the information that the whole area is surrounded by Pakistan Army. I came out from that in disguise, and after 5 to 6 hours, I was in Kandahar.